I've been hiking solo since my early 20s, so I know the rule. Always check your gear before you leave. But I guess I got lazy. The tent was old, a hand-me-down from my dad, and I just assumed it would hold. About 6 hours into the trail, somewhere in the Green Mountains, I heard the snap. One of the fiberglass poles just gave out, split clean in two. It wasn't fixable with duct tape. I stood there in this little clearing, pine needles everywhere, that sharp, clean smell you only get deep in the woods, and I laughed. So anyway, I figured I'd just sleep in the SUV. It was a 2003 Ford Explorer, plenty of room in the back if I folded the seats down. Better than a collapsed tent on my face, right? I didn't think much of it at the time, but locking that door with my key fob was the most important decision I've ever made. I spent the rest of the afternoon taking pictures with my old flip phone, the sunset painting everything orange. I was listening to System of a Down's Toxicity on the drive in, and I can still hear the echo of that CD skipping a little over every bump. I got back to the trailhead, parked in this secluded spot under some pines, and set up my sleeping bag in the cargo area. I texted my ex a photo of the broken tent just to share the joke. No reply. I wasn't surprised. The night was clear, totally quiet except for the wind. I lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling that comfortable kind of tired. I mean, it was just another night in the woods. Nothing to worry about. I must have been asleep for a couple hours when I heard it. You know that sound when someone walks on fresh gravel? That deliberate, slow crunch? It wasn't an animal. Animals don't walk like that. I was instantly awake, every muscle tight. Then came the metallic sound, like someone gently lifting the driver's side door handle. Just testing it. I held my breath, my heart slamming against my ribs. I reached for the key fob in my pocket, my fingers clumsy. I told myself it was probably just some drunk from the campsite down the road, confused which car is his. It happens, I guess, like people get turned around in the dark. The handle jiggled again, more insistent this time. I hit the lock button. The horn beeped, loud and sudden in all that silence. That's when the footsteps stopped. Everything stopped. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I stared at the driver's door, waiting for the window to shatter, waiting for something, but nothing happened. The silence was worse than the noise. I mean, I wanted to believe they'd run off, scared by the horn. That rational part of my brain was working overtime. But the other part, the part that remembers every campfire story you ever heard, whispered that whoever it was hadn't left. They were just waiting. The silence stretched out. It was heavy, like a weight pressing on the car. Then I heard a scratching sound right against the driver's side panel. Slow and deliberate, like someone dragging a key along the paint. I couldn't see anything. My windows were fogged up from my panicked breaths, the box of wet ones on the passenger seat just a blurry white shape. That scratch traveled from the front door all the way to the rear quarter panel, then stopped. A moment later, there was a light tap on the hood, then footsteps on gravel again, circling around to the passenger side. I know bears can be curious, but they don't try door handles, and they don't tap on hoods like that. I told myself maybe it was a park ranger, checking if someone was inside. But a ranger would identify themselves, wouldn't they? They'd say something. The passenger door handle jiggled. I watched the thin metal loop lift and drop, lift and drop. The sound was tiny, metallic, almost polite. And that's when I realized there wasn't just one person. I could see the fog on the window move, as if someone was leaning close, trying to peer through. And then, I heard the handle on the rear hatch try to open too. I was completely surrounded. But yeah, I just sat there frozen, pretending I could still come up with a logical explanation. I barely had time to register the sound before the world exploded. A deafening crack hit the rear driver's side window right behind my head. The glass didn't shatter completely, but it splintered into a white spider web, that awful pattern spreading in an instant. An old Gatorade bottle I'd left in the back rolled off the seat and clattered onto the floor. It was so loud, you know? louder than anything should be in the middle of the woods at midnight. For a split second, I just stared at that fractured glass, my brain refusing to connect the dots. I tried to convince myself it was a mistake. Maybe they thought it was someone else's car. If I just talk to them or yell something, maybe they'll stop. But then the heavy object swung again. A crowbar, a hammer, I don't know. It hit the same window and the web spread further. I heard the metal connect with the frame, a dull, sickening thud. I didn't think. I just moved. I scrambled over the center console toward the driver's seat, my knee catching the gear shift, my hand shaking. I could see a silhouette outside the fogged-up glass, but no face. Nothing human, just a dark shape, an arm pulling back for another blow. No hesitation, no words, just that rhythmic, mechanical violence. I knew if that window gave way, I was done. The arm began its forward swing again, and I fumbled for the key in the ignition. The ignition caught with a snap, the engine roaring to life. I didn't even check my mirrors. I just stomped the gas pedal to the floor. The Ford Explorer lurched forward, gravel spraying out from under the tires like gunshots. I felt a split second of hope. I'm away. I'm getting away. It's just the back. I can get out. That's what I told myself. Then I heard the shatter. A bottle arced through the air and smashed against the already damaged rear window, punching right through the splintered glass. Instantly, a wave of something sticky and burning flooded the cargo area. The smell hit me first, something sour like gasoline mixed with something else, chemicals. Then the heat. It was a physical force, a wall of hot air that shoved against the back of my neck. The fire spread fast, crawling up the seats, the headliner, everything. I saw the foam from the ceiling dripping down in flaming blobs. And then I smelled my own hair burning, that acrid, unmistakable stench. My sleeping bag, my gear, all of it was already gone. The smoke filled the cabin so thick I couldn't see the road. I just kept my foot down, the glow from the back illuminating the trees on either side in this horrible orange light. The heat became unbearable. I couldn't breathe. Flames were licking at the back of my neck, and I knew if I stayed inside, I'd burn alive. I unbuckled my seatbelt, shoved the door open, and threw myself out. The SUV was still moving. I hit the gravel shoulder hard, rolled down a short embankment, and landed in a shallow creek. The cold shock of the water knocked the wind out of me. Then I realized my right sleeve was on fire. I plunged my arm into the water, and I heard that hiss, that tiny sound of flame dying. I just sat there, waist deep in the cold water, my arm throbbing, breathing in the smell of damp earth and wet ash. I looked up. My Ford Explorer, still moving, slowly rolled into a ditch and came to a stop. It was completely engulfed now, an inferno in the middle of the forest. The horn started blasting non-stop as the wiring melted. This continuous, mournful wail that echoed through the trees. I just watched it burn. It felt like it lasted an hour. There was nobody else around. Just me, the fire, and the horn screaming into the empty night. I don't remember much about getting to the hospital. Someone must have seen the flames and called it in. I woke up in a small, sterile room, the chemical smell of antiseptic burning my nose as much as the actual burns on my arm. The silence was heavy, broken only by the hum of the fluorescent lights. A sheriff's deputy came in, a tall guy with a tired face. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He just opened his notebook and started talking in this flat, practiced tone. They'd found the site where I'd parked. They found tire tracks, lots of them, empty beer bottles, cigarette butts, and a stash of half-made Molotov cocktails hidden in the tree line. He used the term serial arson. I wasn't the first. He said there's a local group that gets high, drives up the fire roads, and hunts for lone vehicles. They don't steal anything. They just like watching them burn. They've never been caught. The deputy said they just pick a spot, wait, and hunt. Then he handed me a plastic bag with my half-melted phone inside. The screen was still lit but cracked, and I could see my ex's name on the unread message. That photo of the broken tent still not delivered. He told me I was lucky to be alive, which is a hell of a thing to hear when you realize they're still out there, picking another spot, waiting for the next car to pull in. So anyway, back in 2004, my wife Angela and I decided to take the truck up into the national forest for a day trip. It was a beautiful October afternoon, cool and crisp, the kind where the pine smell just fills the air. We had our old Ford F-150 with the worn Nirvana CD in the player. You know, the one with Come As You Are, that skipped a little at the end. We parked at this secluded trailhead way off the main road, a place we'd been to once before, and spent the whole afternoon hiking and having a picnic. I mean, it was perfect. I didn't know then that someone had been inside our truck long before we found the dead battery. When we got back around dusk, the first thing I noticed was the interior light. It was on, that dim yellow glow spilling onto the dirt. The door wasn't open, but the light was definitely on. I figured I must have left it on by accident. The glove compartment was ajar too, just a crack. I guessed Angela had grabbed a map and didn't shut it tight. So anyway, I dropped into the seat and turned the key. Nothing. Just a weak, metallic click. The battery was stone dead. The forest had gone silent. Not a bird, not a breeze. Just that stillness that presses in on you. And that pine smell, which had been so clean all day, suddenly felt heavy, almost suffocating. I got out and looked around. The trailhead was completely empty. No other cars, no hikers. Just us. And the silence. I remember standing there listening and thinking that something was off. But you know how your mind plays tricks when things go wrong. I told myself it was nothing. But yeah, that silence. It didn't feel right. I popped the hood and stared at the battery like it might suddenly come back to life. No luck. So I went around to the back and dug out the portable jump starter, an old Eveready pack I'd charged maybe a week before. I mean, you know how those things lose charge sitting in the truck, but I was sure I'd topped it off. I hooked it up, got back in, and turned the key. Click. Nothing. The pack was dead too. That's when I caught a smell. Something sour, almost like burnt wiring, drifting up from the jump starter. I pulled it out and the casing felt warm. I guess maybe it had shorted out or something, but it was weird. Angela was standing by the passenger door, arms crossed, starting to get that nervous look she gets. She asked if we had any signal. I checked my phone. Nothing. Neither did hers. Of course. The quiet around us was getting to me by then. I mean, in the woods you expect to hear things, right? Animals, wind, something. But it was just dead. I tried not to let it show, but I felt that little prickle on the back of my neck. I told Angela it was probably my fault, that I forgot to recharge the pack, that we just have to walk. She didn't like it, but what choice did we have? I grabbed the flashlight from the glove box, and we started walking down the trail toward the highway. The beam was already weak, flickering a little. As we stepped away from the truck, I glanced back once. The interior light was still on, that dull glow watching us leave, and the forest stayed completely silent, like it was holding its breath. The trail was narrow and the trees closed in fast once we left the clearing. The flashlight beam kept flickering, and I remember the way it made shadows jump. You'd swear you saw something moving just at the edge of the light. The smell of damp earth rose up from the ground with every step, that dark, wet dirt smell you get deep in the woods. We'd only been walking maybe 10 minutes when I heard it. A rustle, off to the right, just beyond the tree line. I stopped. Angela grabbed my arm. The rustling stopped too. We stood there, frozen, listening. A few seconds of that thick silence, and then footsteps. Soft, careful footsteps, like someone trying to walk quietly over dead leaves. When we'd move, they'd move. When we stopped, they stopped. I tried to tell myself it was probably a deer or a raccoon. I mean, in the woods, animals are everywhere, right? But the way it matched our pace, That felt different. The flashlight was really dying now, so I switched it off to save what little juice was left. Walking in the dark was worse. Every root, every branch that scratched my arm made my heart jump. The rustling kept pace beside us, never coming closer, never falling behind. I could hear Angela's breathing, shallow and fast. I wanted to say something reassuring, but I couldn't find the words. It was like we were both holding our breath, pretending we didn't hear it. And then, from somewhere far behind us, I caught the low rumble of an engine. A moment later, headlights cut through the trees, lighting up the dust on the trail. The rustling went silent. We turned, and I didn't know whether to feel relief or absolute terror. So anyway, this guy stops. And you're so relieved you don't think straight. The headlights came up behind us out of nowhere, and a green U.S. Forest Service truck rumbled to a stop. The ranger leaned over, his face half in shadow, and the first thing I noticed was his smile. Too wide, too steady. He had this low voice, barely more than a whisper, when he asked if we needed help. I told him our battery died down the trail. He just nodded slow and said to get in. The cab was cramped, an old 1998 Chevy Tahoe with the Forest Service shield on the side. A pine tree air freshener dangled from the mirror, but I couldn't smell any pine. The radio hissed static. Nothing but white noise crackling and spitting. The ranger drove with one hand, the other resting loose on his knee. I could hear Angela's breathing beside me, quick and shallow. She was scared. I was too, but I kept thinking about those footsteps that had followed us through the dark, the sound of them stopping when we stopped. I tried to push it down. The ranger didn't ask many questions. He just glanced over now and then, that whisper of a smile still on his face. He said he'd been patrolling all evening and hadn't passed anyone else. Not a soul. I figured he's just a strange guy, but he's a ranger, totally safe. I mean, forest rangers are supposed to be odd, right? But then he asked where we were parked again, like he was testing my answer. I repeated the trailhead name, and he let out a soft sigh, almost a whisper that he thought that area was closed off. The static on the radio went silent for a second, and I heard what sounded like a voice, just a whisper of a word I couldn't catch. The ranger snapped it off fast. We drove on, the headlights carving a tunnel through the dense black trees. Nobody spoke. I could feel the weight of the silence pressing in, and all I could think about was how those footsteps had stopped the moment this truck appeared. He dropped us off at a little diner in Mill Creek, the only place still open. The clock above the counter read 10:47 p.m., and the fluorescent light made everything look washed out. We slid into a booth, and I ordered a slice of cherry pie I couldn't even touch. I just stared at it, half-eaten, feeling the exhaustion settle into my bones. Angela kept rubbing her arms like she couldn't get warm. The ranger didn't leave. He came in and took a stool at the counter, ordered a black coffee, and just sat there. I watched him out of the corner of my eye. He didn't drink it. He just wrapped those gloved hands around the mug and stared at us through the reflection in the napkin holder. The silence in that diner was thick, heavy. The old cooler hummed in the back, but that was it. No one else spoke. Then he stood up and walked over. He stood at our booth looking down, and the silence stretched until I could hear my own pulse. He asked why we left the vehicle. I went through it again. Dead battery, dead jump pack, no signal. He frowned and muttered something so low I almost missed it. He said, "The ground wire." The word had a metallic finality to it, sharp and cold. I asked what he meant. He didn't answer, just kept staring at me with those flat eyes. I guess he was trying to help, but, there was something off. He said he was the only patrol out there that night, which meant nobody else would have seen anything if someone had done this on purpose. That thought sank in my stomach like a stone. I started to ask more, but he turned and walked out without another word. The door chimed, the green truck rumbled away, and the silence came back even louder than before. And the word ground wire kept echoing in my head, hard and metallic. The next morning, we bought a new battery from the auto parts store down the street, and paid a tow truck driver named Earl to take us back up to the trailhead. The whole ride, I kept telling myself it was just bad luck. I mean, who would do that? But yeah, maybe just wrong place, wrong time. When we got there, the truck was sitting right where we left it, but something felt off. The interior light was off now. Earl grabbed his tools and I popped the hood. The moment I looked at the battery, I saw the ground cable. It was cut clean, a straight, deliberate slice through the black rubber and copper. No chewing, no fraying. Earl ran his thumb over it and said it looked like someone used wire cutters, like they wanted to make sure we couldn't get out. I felt ice slide down my spine. Then I opened the driver's door and a wave of rot hit me. Something sour and foul, like meat left in the sun, drifting from inside the cab. I covered my mouth and looked around. The glove compartment was wide open, papers thrown everywhere. And then I saw the bed. Empty. All our camping gear, my toolbox, Angela's bag, gone. I stepped back and my boot crunched on something. A piece of broken window trim, the plastic cracked and splintered. The rear window had been pried at. I realized someone had been inside, rummaging through everything. I spotted a folded piece of paper under the wiper blade. My heart hammered. I picked it up, expecting a note, some kind of threat. But it was just a blank receipt, nothing written on it, no message. Just proof that they'd been there. The quiet of the woods was absolute. I stared at that empty receipt, the rot still in my nose, and I knew. This wasn't random. Someone had done all of this on purpose, and they'd made sure we'd see it. We filed a report with the sheriff's office later that day. The deputy took our statements with a tired look, coffee stains on his shirt. I described the Ranger in full, the green Tahoe, the Forest Service decal, that too wide smile and low whisper of a voice. He set down his pen and told us there was no Ranger matching that description in the district. Not a single one, and no green truck registered. He'd been there since 2007, he said, and knew every badge. The case number he gave us, I scribbled on a napkin. The ink faded within a week, smeared out to nothing in my pocket, like it was never there at all. We tried to forget. I told myself it was probably just some drifter. It's over now. But yeah, every time I heard footsteps in the woods, or just leaves skittering across the driveway at night. I mean, you never really forget. The damp earth smell from that trail clung to our clothes for weeks. I'd pull a shirt from the drawer and catch it again. That dark, wet dirt smell. It was like the forest had followed us home. Then about a month later, I found the old jump starter in the garage. Just for the hell of it, I hooked it to my neighbor's car. It cranked over instantly, full power. No drain, no short. That unit was fine. Someone had drained it that night, emptied it while we were hiking. That realization hit me harder than anything. It meant they'd been inside our truck, waiting, planning, long before we came back. Now I can't sleep in the woods without a knife close. The silence before dawn is the worst part, that heavy stillness. Because in that quiet, I still hear the whisper of that ranger's voice. And sometimes when I'm alone, I catch that damp earth smell again, as if something from that night is still standing right behind me. My brother Paul got the idea in his head sometime in early spring. He'd spread a map of the Flathead National Forest across the kitchen table and kept tapping a blank green patch way up in the northwest corner. 3 days, no trails, no people. Just us and whatever was left of the real wilderness. You know how it is when someone you love gets that look in their eye. You can't say no. So anyway, we tossed our gear into the back of my old '99 Chevy Tahoe and left Missoula while the streets were still dark. I remember Kurt Cobain screaming through the speakers, the whole Nevermind album rattling the windows as the city lights faded in the rear view. By the time the sun broke over the mountains, we were parked at a trailhead that barely deserved the name. Just a gap in the trees and a register box with a lid that hadn't been opened in weeks. I didn't know that by the next night I'd be praying to see a grizzly, because what actually came out of the dark was something that didn't belong in any forest. That first day was, I mean, like something out of a dream. The air smelled so heavy with pine it almost hurt to breathe, and the ground under our boots was soft with layers of damp earth that probably hadn't seen sunlight in 100 years. We hiked until our shoulders ached, following a creek that got louder the deeper we went. By evening, we found a flat spot right where the water tumbled over a mess of fallen logs, and we pitched the tent while the light turned gold. The silence settled in. Not the empty kind, but the kind that feels like the forest is holding its breath. Somewhere behind us, a branch snapped, sharp and clean, and Paul muttered something about a deer. I wanted to believe him, but yeah, the feeling of being watched never really went away. The second morning, the trail just sort of gave up. What had been a narrow path through the ferns became a game trail. Then nothing, just scattered pine needles and moss-covered rocks. My Garmin GPS map 60CS still held a signal, barely, but that little screen felt like the only thing tethering us to the real world. Paul was loving it. He said something about how we'd finally found a place that didn't care if we lived or died, and I guess he meant it as a compliment. I mean, you know that feeling when you're so far out that your brain starts playing tricks? Like every shadow looks wrong. That was me. Around midday, I spotted a fresh blaze on a hemlock, a clean axe cut, the wood underneath still pale and sticky with sap. It couldn't have been more than a couple of weeks old, but I told myself it was leftover from some hunter the previous season. Just tourists, I guess, or maybe a backcountry ranger passing through. And then I let it go. There was nothing else to do. By late afternoon, we hit a ridge and decided to call it camp. The view opened up into a sea of treetops and the air was dead still. No breeze at all. I was kneeling by my pack when I heard it, a rustle, low from the thick brush about 20 yards downhill. Not footsteps exactly, something softer, like fabric dragging over bark. I froze, and the silence that followed was the deepest thing I'd ever heard. No birds, no insects, nothing. I remember whispering to myself that it was probably a squirrel, or maybe just the wind picking up for a second. But the wind never came. We set up the tent without saying much after that, and I caught Paul glancing over his shoulder more than once. The sun dropped fast behind the ridge and the cold came with it. We'd built a small fire, more for the comfort than the heat, and Paul pulled out his beat-up flask of Jack Daniels. The flames were crackling low, and for a few minutes it almost felt normal again. Two brothers shooting the breeze with whiskey burning the backs of their throats. Then we heard the footsteps. I mean, like they were right there, not sneaking, not trying to be quiet. Heavy, deliberate boots coming straight toward us out of the black. And then this blinding beam of blue-white light hit me square in the face. One of those overpowered Phoenix flashlights, the kind that turns the world into ice. The man holding it stepped into the edge of the firelight, and the first thing I registered was that he wasn't wearing a uniform, just a plain olive shirt, dark pants, and boots that looked like they'd never touched dirt before tonight. He said his name was Ranger Billings, told us we were camped inside a designated wilderness recovery zone, and that we had to pack up immediately and follow him out. His voice, and then, I don't know, it was almost mechanical, flat, like he'd rehearsed the words 100 times, but didn't care if we believed them. Paul had already started reaching for his pack, but I didn't move. Something was off. No badge, no radio, no vehicle anywhere near. Just a man, a flashlight, and an order to walk into the dark with him. I looked at Paul, and he looked at me, and neither of us said a word while the fire popped and spit between us and this stranger who called himself a ranger. I was staring at his boots. I couldn't help it. They were spotless. I mean, like fresh off the shelf at some outdoor store in Kalispell. Not a scuff on them. And this guy was supposed to be a backcountry ranger? Someone who walks these trails every day? The math wasn't adding up. His shirt had no patch, no name tag, nothing. And he wasn't wearing a radio, which, I mean, even a volunteer carries a radio out there. The whole thing felt wrong in a way I couldn't shake. Paul had already started stuffing his sleeping bag into his pack. My brother, he's the practical one, always does what he's told. But I just stood there, looking at this man's face, and I noticed a smell coming off him. Something sour, like old sweat that had soaked into fabric and never dried right. It caught my throat. I asked him, flat out, to show me some identification. He kind of tilted his head, like I'd said something unexpected, and then he said his badge was back in his truck. The truck was about 2 miles down an old service road we couldn't see. We just needed to walk with him. Right now. I didn't move. The fire popped and the silence between us stretched thin. I kept thinking, maybe he's just some park volunteer who takes his job way too seriously, or maybe he's new and they haven't issued him the uniform yet. I wanted that to be true, but the way he stood there, perfectly still, his jaw tight, it felt more like a threat than an offer of help. My hand found the flask of Jack Daniels in my pocket and I squeezed it, the metal cold against my palm. I said it again. Show me your ID. I wasn't asking anymore. The guy stared at me for a long second, long enough that I saw something shift behind his eyes, some calculation. Then he just muttered, "Fine," and shut off the flashlight. That blue-white beam didn't fade. It snapped off, and the darkness crashed down on us like a wave. I couldn't see my own hands. The silence that followed. I mean, I've never heard anything like it. No footsteps retreating, no branches breaking, no sound of fabric moving. It was like he'd never been there, like he just blinked out of existence. And then somewhere way off in the trees, a single branch snapped, sharp and dry. It echoed and then died. Paul scrambled for his headlamp. The beam cut a shaky circle through the trees, but there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. I grabbed my buck knife from my belt, and Paul dug out the pepper spray from his pack. We sat back to back on the cold ground, staring into two halves of the same darkness. And you know, I could feel my heartbeat in my teeth. Neither of us said a word. What could we even say? The fire had burned down to embers, and somewhere beyond the light, I knew he was still watching. Every sound became footsteps, a pine cone dropping, the rustle of a mouse in the underbrush, my own breathing. It all turned into something coming closer. I sat there with the knife handle slick in my grip, and I tried to convince myself that the guy had just bolted, that he was some weirdo who liked scaring campers, and when we called his bluff, he ran. I guess that made sense. But why didn't we hear him leave? At some point, maybe around 2 in the morning, we started hearing something else. A rustle, steady and slow, like something heavy was circling the camp. Not rushing, just taking its time. Footsteps maybe, but too deliberate to be an animal. It would move for a count of 10 or 12, then pause, then move again. Paul whispered that it was walking a perimeter around us, and I hated how right he sounded. We didn't dare move. We just sat there while the cold seeped through our clothes and the sky refused to lighten. When dawn finally broke, gray and exhausted, we searched the ground. No tracks, nothing. Just our own boot prints in the scattered remains of our fire. We packed in silence, moving fast, and practically ran the 6 miles back to the trailhead. The Tahoe's engine coughed twice before it turned over, and I have never been so relieved to hear a V8 roar in my life. We kicked up gravel and didn't look back, but I swear I could feel eyes on the rear window the whole way out. The sheriff's office in Kalispell smelled like coffee and damp earth tracked in from 100 pairs of boots. The deputy who took our report was polite, I guess, but his face said everything. No Ranger Billings had ever been assigned to that district. There were no wilderness recovery zones in the area we described. He typed up our statement and told us to call if we remembered anything else. But yeah, the way he closed the folder, it was already over for him. We drove home in silence. I wanted to feel safe again. I wanted to laugh about it with Paul over a beer and call it a wild story. But a few weeks later, Paul's phone rang at 2 in the morning. Unknown number. He answered and nobody spoke. Just breathing. Or maybe not even breathing. Just an open line and some distant rustling. Like fabric, like the woods at night. He called me right after, and we both pretended it was nothing. Wrong number, probably. These things happen. Then a week after that, I was standing in my own kitchen, unable to sleep, when a light swept across the backyard. Blue-white, sharp as ice. It bounced once off the fence and vanished. I ran outside in my bare feet, but there was nothing. The grass was wet and the air was still, and I was completely alone. We never told anyone about that part. I mean, who would believe it? The forest didn't let us go. It just got quieter. And I think sometimes that's the worst thing of all.